People understand overwhelmingly that we have no choice.
Day one of the lockdown, a trickle of people on Northampton High Street. The London to Birmingham morning train empty. Many, it seems, agree lockdown was inevitable and maybe had been for some time.
Oh, I think we should have done it a while ago. Let's just get it over and done with.
I think we should have done it all the way through, actually, and not really mixed as much as we did during the winter or during the Christmas time.
Yeah, I suppose I just have like lockdown fatigue, and I'm just like used to it by now when like everything's kind of a bit rubbish. So it's just like getting through it and trying not to think about it too much.
At this afternoon's press conference, the chief medical advisor said infection rates had hit record levels.
And we're now into a situation where across the country as a whole, roughly 1 in 50 people have got the virus, higher in some parts of the country, lower in others. But 1 in 50 is really quite a very large number indeed.
The Prime Minister emphasised the vaccination rollout. He said the government would soon publish daily updates and had made good progress on vaccinating one particular priority group.
23% of all the over 80s in England. And that means that nearly 1 in 4 of one of the most vulnerable groups will have in 2 to 3 weeks, all of them, a significant degree of immunity.
It was, he suggested, evidence he could fulfil the hope he raised in his broadcast last night.
By the middle of February, if things go well and with a fair wind in our sails, we expect to have offered the first vaccine dose to everyone in the 4 top priority groups.
Those groups consist of the over 70s, those who are clinically extremely vulnerable, care home residents and frontline care and health workers, together totalling around 14 million. So if they're all vaccinated in 6 weeks, the government would have to deliver 2 million vaccines a week. Something Scotland's First Minister thought was just too risky to predict.
The commitment the Prime Minister gave last night, standing here right now, I don't yet have enough certainty on the supply after the end of January to say categorically, looking down this camera, that we think we can do those first 4 groups of the priority list by mid-February, I think the Prime Minister said.
Safety tests on the vaccine batches being carried out at these government Hertfordshire laboratories can take 4 to 5 days. There may be limits to how much they can be speeded up. And there are questions over how confident we can be of manufacturers' supply.
It's very rare, almost unheard of, to get more vaccine than you asked for. You rarely even get as much as you asked for, and most often you don't get as much as you asked for. And everybody points a finger at everybody else. It is a complex dance, and to get it all right is very, very challenging.
The chairs are staying on the tables in schoolrooms for some time yet. The Prime Minister today wouldn't commit to schools being open again by the summer, but hoped for better news before that. In the London Borough of Greenwich, at a school that wanted to close 3 weeks ago, today's lockdown has special poignancy.
We had a particularly turbulent last week of the Christmas term here in Greenwich when we did close, but then were told that we had to open, threatened with the law to have to open. So you may forgive us in Greenwich for raising an eyebrow slightly about a total lockdown being announced on the first day of term.
The school said teachers urgently needed clarity on what would replace this year's A-levels and GCSEs. 130,000 students due to sit their B.Tech exams over the next 3 weeks have been told it's up to their colleges to decide if they're happy to go ahead.
Thanks, everybody.
College leaders said the government should take responsibility for the decision and cancel the exams now.
Gary Gibbon. Well, earlier I spoke to Dr Mary Bowster, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. I asked her whether the fierce criticism of the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, by teachers was fair.
Gavin Williamson has been woeful. He has been warned repeatedly about what would happen if you put year groups back in secondary schools of up to 180 children, mixing in school, mixing on the way to school. And now we have the highest levels of COVID infection amongst secondary school pupils of any age group. Gavin Williamson was warned that you can't just say exams will happen, because it's likely there would be a second wave, and it was possible there would be a second lockdown. He ignored that advice and he carried on with a political ideology rather than caring for the nation's children and young people. He was warned that you had to have internet access and laptops for disadvantaged pupils, and he has not provided those in anything like enough quantity. Again and again and again. He hasn't just been behind the curve, he hasn't even known where the curve is. And I'm afraid that's the problem.
Now, your colleagues at the NASUWT have found some figures that you've been after about the infection rates for teachers. How does that change things in your mind?
Well, I think it's very concerning. We've just today sent out a Freedom of Information request to all local authorities to say how many teachers have died through COVID in every local authority in England. We will be very interested to see those figures. We were always suspicious of the statistics which said that teachers were no more at risk than any other profession, because when those figures were collected, it was very soon after the start of term and there wasn't time for COVID to develop in the profession. So if there's evidence that actually teachers have been at increased risk, then I think that is shameful. I think it's shameful that the government hasn't investigated those figures before now. But if they won't, we will.
Now, one of the reasons Gavin Williamson wanted to keep exams going was because he said the evidence showed that minority groups do worse when they are being assessed by teachers than they do in exams because of things like unconscious bias. How are you going to get that out of the system?
Well, actually, that's not true. He uses his research evidence very selectively. The truth of the matter is, if teachers are trained in assessment and trained in unconscious bias, then it can be rooted out of the system very effectively. And that training needs to happen now, because if teachers are going to be doing this, it's not that teachers are deliberately discriminating against particular pupils, but teachers are subject, like everyone else, to the inequalities in our society, and unconscious bias.
So a couple of months before they're going to have to give in their assessments, teachers have not been trained?
Yeah. No, they haven't, no. Teachers haven't been trained for years and years and years in summative assessment for exam grades, because Michael Gove changed the whole system to external examination. So they do need that training and they do need that support so they can tackle unconscious bias, absolutely.
Mary Bowster, thank you very much. Well, I'm joined now by the former Education Secretary, Damien Hinds, who was replaced when Boris Johnson took over as Prime Minister by Gavin Williamson. Good evening. Would you have made all the same blunders as Gavin Williamson if you'd have kept the job?
Well, look, just before I begin, can I just pay tribute to Mary Bowsted's members and all other teachers who've been doing, I mean, a colossal amount of work and an incredible job in keeping schools open and starting these catch-up programs and having to deal with all the disruption, getting schools ready for the safe return in September, and now, of course, having prepared for testing. And it's been a very unsettling time for everybody in education. And I think all teachers, school leaders deserve a huge amount of appreciation. Look, in terms of your question about political leadership and about system level decisions, these are, I mean, we keep saying, unprecedented times, but they really are unprecedented times. There is no manual for how you deal with this kind of pandemic. And I think everybody, from the Education Secretary down, everybody has been trying to do their very best in very difficult circumstances and prioritising trying to keep children in school, because we know that for so many reasons, including, by the way, their mental and physical health, for so many reasons, it's so important to have children in school.
But that's the trouble, isn't it? His best is not good enough. He's incompetent to a level nobody can remember. He didn't learn from the Scottish exams debacle. He's repeated it. He's now in a situation where teachers are not trained to assess GCSE and A-level results. He's put people's health at risk. I mean, he's pretended that teachers were not in any more risk of infection when the numbers released only today show that they were.
Well, look, it's not politicians that make calculations about epidemiology and about risk of infection. That's advice, comes from the medics, comes from the scientists, and it's right the government pays attention to that, and that's also the evidence. That's the information that members of Parliament receive. As I said,
but have you seen those numbers today from 3 local authorities, which which go well against what Gavin Williamson has always insisted, that teachers were not at greater risk from staying in the classroom with young people who were spreading the virus. And they show that, in fact, in the 3 local authorities that have released their figures, teachers were perhaps 3 times as likely to get the virus.
Well, look, obviously, I don't want anybody to get the virus. And again, I want to pay tribute to teachers for what they have been doing. And I think they do deserve, they merit particular protection and respect. Absolutely. But, the SAGE group and the other medical and scientific advisors, they do have access to information and data and make their analyses. And then they advise government, and our understanding is that there hasn't been a higher risk compared to other occupations.
I mean, I started with saying, would you have made all the same mistakes? I mean, you can surely see there have been blunders.
Oh, look, there have been mistakes in this in this pandemic. There are things which clearly people would do differently. A second time. We hope, God willing, there won't be a second time in quite the same way for some things. But for example, there's questions about exams to happen for this summer. And of course, it is crucial that lessons are learned from last time. And they will be. There'll be consultation on how to make sure exams
last year, the exams had to be cancelled. And they are cancelled again this year. He didn't learn the lessons. This is the man you can literally say, you let yourself down and the whole school down.
Christian, I'm not sure you can. I'm not sure you can say that. The important point is that we need to make sure that young people, pupils, students are graded fairly, can show what they can do, and particularly for public exams, or they'll carry those with them into adult life. That their achievements, the knowledge, the skills they've developed are properly reflected. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, you wouldn't do again what happened last summer. By the way, in Scotland or England, wouldn't do things exactly as they were done last time. It's important that we learn those lessons. Those lessons will be learned. There'll be consultation on the system to happen for exams this year to make sure it's fair and equitable for everyone.